today is going well.
Y'all ready for this? Yeah? All right. Look at all the nerds in this room. Hello and welcome to Witch Please, Fandom, Feminism, and Harry Potter.
Go on.
I'm Hannah McGregor.
I'm Marcel Coswin.
And I'm Neil Barnholden.
Witch Please, for those of you who don't know, is a fortnightly podcast that Marcel and I have been making since February of this year. Doesn't it feel like so much longer? Yeah. Like years.
Every episode I edit feels like an hour times a million.
That's because it is. In which we bring together our work as feminist literary critics at the University of Alberta and our love for the Harry Potter world. Neil is our regular guest host on our movie episodes and a real-life guy with a film degree.
It's true. It's true.
And we invited him here today both because we love him and also because we wanted a token white male panelist in case anybody's really uncomfortable listening to women speak for half an hour. Just so you know.
He's not allowed to talk, though.
Yeah.
He's just a pretty face.
Yeah, he's just here to give us just some cultural legitimacy. Thanks, Neil. So who here has listened to Witch Please before? All right. All right.
A lot of new people. This is exciting.
Yeah. So here's how this is going to go. We're going to chat a bit about the main themes of this panel, and then we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. We're going to have lots of opportunities for you to ask us any questions that you might have. I want you to note that we are recording this for a podcast episode, and so if you ask a question, we're going to ask you to come up to the mic and ask a question, and you will be recorded for the podcast. So if you are uncomfortable being listened to by several dozen people, be aware of that. Also, our erstwhile tech support, Trevor Chow-Fraser.
Hi, how are you doing?
Is going to be taking pictures during the panel. So if you're uncomfortable with your picture being taken, just let him know afterwards, and he will immediately delete it forever.
They're static, not moving.
They're not, so if you're frightened of moving pictures and the terrifying modernity they represent, you're okay.
I think he's making a Harry Potter joke.
Oh, Harry Potter. Oh.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with it. Okay, well, we lost Marcel. All right, anything you want to add about the podcast? No? Are we ready? All right.
Wait, no, can I add one thing? I'm really excited that for the first time in our recording history, I only have 45 minutes of footage to edit, as opposed to like 3.5 hours of us talking.
We have trouble. We have trouble not talking for a long time.
Very excited.
All right, witches, gird your loins and grab your copies of The Second Sex, because it's time for Hermione Granger and the Goddamn Patriarchy, which is our brand new segment in which we talk about feminism. I don't think I've ever heard feminism get a round of applause before. I love all of you.
So fun.
All right, so we're going to start off. I have a question for Marcel. I warned Marcel about this question. Hey, Marcel, what do you think it means to be a feminist critic?
That's a great question, Hannah.
Thanks.
By warn, what Hannah means is that like 10 seconds before we came into this room, she was like, here's this question I'm going to ask you. It's real hard. So I don't have a rehearsed answer. So what you will get is an answer that comes from deep within my fiery soul. What I would say about being a feminist critic is that it's a situation in which you find yourself... okay, wait, let me talk about feminist criticism as it pertains to things that I like. So often what that means is that while I'm enjoying something, there's this part of my brain that's like, hey, there's this thing that's happening that I don't like, and I have to be like, shut up, brain, I'm trying to watch TV right now, or something like that. So being a feminist critic is really a process of separating out the things that are enjoyable about something and then the things that are deeply troubling to you in a political way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or alternatively, separating out the things that you like from the things that like fill your belly with a burning fury of thrill rides. I'm thinking of Mad Max.
All right, beautiful. Neil, would you add anything to that?
No. It's really good.
Neil knows his place.
Casual misandry is what we do best here at Witch Please.
You told me I was here to license your misandry, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Hashtag no tall men. I think that's how that goes. So we're going to chat a little bit just in these first few minutes about to what degree we sort of have this overriding question that we've been chatting about for a little while. That's about to what degree Harry Potter is itself a quintessentially feminist I was about to say archive because I'm an academic and can't use normal words for things. Bunch of books and movies. Is itself quintessentially feminist? Is that intrinsic to it? Or is the project that we're undergoing a sort of using a feminist lens on something that like might be amenable to a feminist reading, but isn't itself necessarily feminist already? All right, like I think that's an important question. We were at the Quidditch in Edmonton panel earlier today. Quidditch, hi guys. And we were talking about how Quidditch as a game is an incredibly inclusive and particularly gender diverse community. And that, for me, sort of represents this larger trend I think we see in the Harry Potter fandom, that it attracts a lot of feminists, a lot of political lefties, a lot of secret communists, a lot of queer people. I think that a lot of us who have had trouble finding our identities in normative culture find something in Harry Potter that speaks to us. And I'm curious about what you guys might think that is.
I have this theory that it's because in a lot of ways, even though Harry is a white middle-class cisgender male person.
Don't forget straight and able-bodied.
Oh, straight and able-bodied. Well, we don't know that he's straight when he's 11. Let's not make assumptions, Hannah.
Sorry, that was a spoiler.
So despite the fact that Harry fits the stereotype of the majority of protagonists, what am I talking about? Despite that fact, I think a lot of us have this kind of identification with him where he feels really isolated and left out. And then this letter shows up, and a billion letters show up. And he realizes that there's actually a place where he belongs. And I think that that as a fundamental premise is one of the reasons why so many of us who feel otherwise completely isolated by mainstream culture identify so intensely with this series, even though it's not specifically speaking to us. It's this idea that somewhere out there is a community of people who is incredible and complex and is not perfect, but is where you belong, and eventually it will find you or you will find it.
Yeah. And there might not be textually queer characters, right? There's the sort of retroactive claim from Rowling that Dumbledore is gay, we have a... James, okay, well, shipping aside, and like subtext aside, right? Like there's a number of Hogwarts spinsters who I'm pretty sure are lesbians. But sort of that aside, there's also like the world, particularly the world that sort of Dumbledore and his version of magic are trying to create, is a radically inclusive world, right? That makes a lot of space for difference, and difference that is sort of uncomfortable difference that isn't easily reconcilable with your world as you know it, right? It's one where it's not okay to subjugate people who are different. There's a sort of radical, not just respect or tolerance, right? Which is a really, like a word we should all be suspicious of, right? Tolerating people means you still hate them, you just like don't throw rocks at them in public. Like, we can shoot for better than tolerance. But that, an actual inclusivity that means challenging your prejudices about what other people are like and really sort of making space in your world for difference, right? That I think is represented in lots of forms in the books. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fantasy that is partially allegorical, but still has links to a recognizable real world that we all inhabit. I think that makes it actually quite relatable as a fantasy work. So I think you follow Harry through this transition from a world that we recognize into, this kind of much more interesting and much more exciting world, I would say, in terms of possibility.
Yeah. So Neil was making the point the other day. We were talking about fandom in the Harry Potter world and feminism. Neil made the very interesting point that when Emma Watson recently sort of stepped out and became a public advocate for feminism on a global scale, there was no way in which anybody registered that as at odds with her identity as Hermione Granger, right? That it just seemed so obvious. It's like, of course Hermione Granger's a great feminist, and she's gonna like go to the UN and be like, pretty sure none of you have read your feminist text, so let me explain to you how feminism works. It's called a library. It's all in there. You can all figure it out. And so that does suggest that there's sort of this, even beyond the edges of the text, this way that feminism has sort of leaked into the larger world of the fandom. Do you want to? This was your idea. I just said your idea.
I agree with your paraphrase of my idea.
Thanks. Thanks. Thanks so much, Marcel.
Well, are we segueing into talking about is Harry Potter an intrinsically feminist text?
Yeah.
Okay.
Answer that question. Is Harry Potter an intrinsically feminist text?
No, but I would say that it's certainly amenable to it. Like, I think that it definitely has, I would put it in the category of what I call pro-feminist. So it definitely has elements to it that are friendly to balls. Sorry. That stands
Not
for
friendly towards
badass lady scholars.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's at the end of my official title, Hannah McGregor, PhD, BALS.
Yeah, so Harry Potter has Harry Potter as a thing, as a universe, has lots of space in it for feminisms. But is it itself a feminist text? I would say no, because the protagonist is male, because do any of the movies pass the Bechdel test?
Oh, there's a question. Do you guys think any of the movies pass the Bechdel test?
None of them?
None.
It's a letdown. Because everybody's talking about Harry all the time. And ultimately, when you come back to sort of a whole series of texts that are about like a white man and his victories, that's like, it's a little at odds with sort of one of the arguments feminism makes, which is that we need to have more space for women's stories to be told. And Harry Potter is ultimately a man's story being told.
Yeah.
But it's got these spaces in it, right? It's got a lot of spaces in it that you can find for yourself.
It's very, very friendly towards feminism and feminist participation.
Yeah. And in turn, we are friendly towards it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Also, just for the record, the Bechdel test is not a bar for feminism. It's just a bar for like decent representation of women in movies, and it's a low bar.
Lowest bar. Also, some movies pass it and are not feminist.
Yeah.
What was that movie? Was that Zack Snyder movie? Sucker Punch. That passes the Bechdel test, and that's nothing with that many hot pants can be feminist. No dice.
So quotable.
Just speaking sound bites.
Oh my. This is why it takes so long to edit, because we're so funny.
Sorry. Are you all ready to be transported to a magical world of feeling ambivalent about things? Then grab hold of the problematic port key, in which we are going to chat a little bit about the degree to which we feel there's a divide between being literary and cultural critics and being fans. Hey, Neil, I've got a question.
Oh, yeah.
Do you ever experience tension between your work as a cultural critic and your identity as a fan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea of the problematic is really relevant there.
Can you explain it? Can you explain what
I
problematic
can.
means? Thanks, Neil.
In common usage, I think people often say problematic when they just mean that they hate something or that it's terrible, which is not what it means. It's specifically not just a problem, but where there is something that has the dimension of a problem, but there's something that doesn't have the dimension of a problem. So I actually think that you two on this podcast do an excellent job of the problematic.
Neil.
It's not a verb, but because I'm an academic, I'm making it a verb. Yeah.
It's called problematizing.
Problematizing, yeah. You do a great job of problematizing that problematic thing. Yeah, so I think often there is at odds there where I think as a fan there's a certain gravity that pulls you towards not engaging with the problematic parts of something or even denying that there are problematic parts of something, kind of de-problematizing something.
Yeah.
And I think when you're a cultural critic, that's your bread and butter. That's where you live.
Yeah.
Is the
Yeah.
problematic.
And you don't live in, I think a mistake that a lot of people who are maybe new to literary criticism or sort of only passingly familiar with the kind of work we do, sort of mistake it for essentially, I prove that I am smarter than a text and then I win. So it's like I trick J.K. Rowling into secretly being a racist. And then I'm like, haha, smarter than J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, like you caught her.
Yeah, like I caught her, right?
Yeah.
Like it's debate club, and I will always win because books can't talk back. But that's usually not what we're doing, right? Usually we are working on objects that we find fascinating and engaging and exciting in some way, but we are not writing, we're not writing book reports, right? We're not writing like, oh, this is neat. It's neat, I like it. We get further into texts, right? We talk a lot about unpacking them as though texts are like a box full of old clothes and you're trying to figure out what's in there. But that's really what you're doing, right? You're opening them up and you're going through what's inside and trying to sort them out and trying to understand them better. And I think Derrida once said, I'm sorry, oh God, I'm nervous. But I think Derrida once said when people are talking about deconstruction, which is the thing that he does and how it's really violent, and he said, I would never deconstruct something I didn't love because it would be a waste of my energy. Right? Like you don't spend the time thinking critically about something that you're not in some way a little bit in love with because that's like it's a lot of work. Really, if you hate something, you're gonna spend a lot of time thinking about and reading something you hate.
Yeah, it's a lot of emotional work too, right? So not just the actual work of thinking and writing, or what we do is thinking and then talking, or reading and then thinking and then talking, or some combination of that. But it's also the amount of work that you put into your emotional investments. We often don't, the term for this is affective labor, and it's been sort of popping up in blogs and that recently. So
Internet feminism.
So affective labor is typically the type of work that you don't get paid for, but it's like the emotional work that you do. It typically falls to women to do it in a lot of different types of contexts, not always, but often.
It's the way when women have a job, they're often the ones who sort of volunteer to spend extra time on things, talk to people who are having a bad day, talk people down when they're, upset about something. You end up doing twice the work because in addition to doing your actual job, you're also caring for people all the time.
Yeah.
But you don't get paid for that because we have, a patriarchal structure to our labor system, and so we only acknowledge certain forms of labor as being worthy of pay, and that's forms of labor that women aren't likely or aren't as frequently doing.
Yeah. So when you are engaging with a text and you love that text, you're spending a lot of emotional energy in interacting with it. And if you're doing that with something that you don't love, it's not just exhausting, but it's in addition to being not exhausting, wow. Oh boy, I'm good at words today. In addition to being exhausting, it's also not at all rewarding. Whereas when you spend that labor, when you spend that time and energy on something that you do love, and you are coming to understand it in different ways, in a lot of ways it's like a relationship. You're really learning more about it. You are coming to understand it through different perspectives, and it's worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with a dear friend of all of ours, who I won't name because maybe she doesn't want everybody in this room to know this. But we were talking about a show we've recently both watched, Sense8, which I watched and I loved. And then I'm also pretty critical of it because it's got some sketchy racial tropes going on in it and a sort of very American image of what globalization looks like. We can talk about it after. But I was talking about her with it. We both love it. I watched it because she told me to, and I was talking with her about it, and I started talking about this interesting critical article I'd read, and she was like, no, don't. I don't want to do that. I just want to love this thing. And I was like, oh my God, I never just want to love anything. The more I like something, the more I want to be like, oh, let's just rip it to shreds. It's so exciting. Sorry. Friendship with me is fun.
It's kind of, sometimes I think about that kind of critical engagement as, so we're keeping it cleanish, it's G-rated, but it's like a really erotic kind of engagement, right? Because you're like really getting into and interacting with all of the different like sensual things that come along with a text or a film or something. It's like a really beautiful, sensual, erotic kind of relationship at its best.
Yeah. So what we've ended up doing in the podcast as we've been revisiting the books and movies and also starting to sort of move out into the larger surrounding fandom, and we're sort of engaging with more other kinds of text. Sorry, we call everything a text in literary criticism. So like we played the Lego Harry Potter video game, but like we call that a text because we're terrible.
Or an archive if there's more
Or an
than
archive
one.
if there's more than one.
Yeah.
An archive of texts, yeah. Gross.
We're the worst.
Yeah, but what we've been finding is sort of, you move back and forth. You go through the book and you find moments that you're like, oh my God, this moment is incredible. This is, Rowling has done this incredible thing in the 5th book, which we just finished talking about, where she sort of sets up a situation essentially where Harry is being gaslighted. Gaslit?
Gaslighted.
Gaslighted?
Okay, we're all agreeing on gaslighted. Good, consensus. He's being gaslighted basically by his whole culture, saying he has experienced this intense trauma, and everybody around him is saying, like, nope, didn't happen, you're crazy, right? Which is exactly what gaslighting as a form of emotional abuse entails, that somebody says, I've been through this trauma, I've been through this experience, and everybody's like, you probably made it up for attention. That's literally what they're saying to him, right? And the book gives you this narrative of him refusing that and ultimately being vindicated in having his story legitimized, which for people who have an experience of abuse and an experience of not being listened to, that's just this really, really beautiful narrative that I think is a really valuable narrative for young people to be reading, right? Like, don't listen. If you know something happened to you and the adults in your life are telling you to shut up about it, do not listen, right? Like, believe yourself. And that's absolutely incredible and beautiful. And then we got to the end of the book, and we were like, oh, the centaur is so racist. So very creepy, racist, sort of indigenous trope. They're all like burning sage and shooting arrows and like kidnapping women and carrying them off into the forest. And it's like, okay, that wasn't a super good job. Like and those things can coexist in a reading, right? That you can look at the book and be like, there are moments when it's incredible and moments when it is completely failed. And that, like, one doesn't cancel the other out.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately.
Yeah, it'd be really nice if all the good stuff just made the bad stuff disappear. But it doesn't, right? And if you ignore the bad stuff, well, you ignore forms of oppression that continue to structure our society, right? If I close my eyes to just not look at the racism because it makes me sad, or to not look at the fat shaming because it makes me feel uncomfortable, well, then I'm essentially consenting to that continuing to be a thing that happens in our culture on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No dice. Mm-mm. Okay, all right, so we're gonna open up the floor to questions. We are interested in questions about any of the stuff that we just said, but also questions about the podcast, about making a podcast, about Harry Potter in general. But again, be warned, you are being recorded. But in like just a loving, non-judgmental way. Yeah. So any questions?
Hello.
Hi.
Fan of the podcast, that's why.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I was just wondering, I didn't hear in any of the ones that I've listened to so far, which Hogwarts house.
Oh. Yeah, we really take that for granted, don't we?
Haven't we talked about that in person in the countless hours that we talk around?
I think I
the
just
book?
edit it out every time because I'm like, oh, everybody already knows. That's the voice that I make when I'm editing. So I'm a Ravenclaw.
Yeah, I also identify as a Ravenclaw, though I believe that there's a fairly good chance I might have been sorted into Slytherin.
I just Hufflepuff. It's
Yeah.
wow.
The most
know what,
popular.
Roland
Hufflepuff
said,
for life.
Dawn
For
of
life?
the Age of Hufflepuff. Yeah. Yeah, right?
It's your year, Neil. It's your year.
Because the new movie's coming out, and it's
Oh,
about
yeah,
what's his
yeah.
face?
Newt Scamander. Yeah.
Newt Scamander. Thank you. I love being in a room where I can just be like, "What? Yeah, thanks." And he's a Hufflepuff, so we're gonna have a Hufflepuff hero, right? As a
Yeah,
side note, despite the fact that we are both proud Ravenclaws, we believe very strongly that Hufflepuff is the only Hogwarts house that has an ethical approach to pedagogy, because Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin are all about only teaching selective subgroups of students, right? Ravenclaw's like, only the smartest, no dumb students allowed, right? Which is like a really bad approach to teaching. And Gryffindor's like, only the bravest, which is like, you're 11. And then Slytherin is literally just the Nazi school.
It's like, oh, are you wealthy and white?
Right.
Are you white enough and you were wealthy once? Cool.
Great. Whereas Hufflepuff is like, yeah, no, we'll teach everybody and treat them the same. And it's like, oh, the only place you would actually send your children, right? Yeah. Like, because that's how a school should work.
Oh, I feel like because he's not on a mic, we should also add that our erstwhile tech support, Trevor Chow Fraser,
Hi, how are you doing?
is 100% Slytherin.
Oh my God, such a Slytherin. Just look at him trolling us constantly. All right, Trevor.
Is the mic not working?
Trevor, are you trolling us right now?
Oh no.
The mic's not recording?
Did we get the previous question?
That one is. You're so smart. Okay, so now if you want to ask a question, you have to come all the way up here.
Look at this. Look at this.
All right.
Look at these problem-solving men. That's why I break the mics all the time.
It's not a podcast this time, so we can do physical comedy. It's great.
Yes. Hi.
Hi. I was wondering what you guys thought of the moment in the seventh book where,
Trevor, cover your ears.
oh,
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Commence Obliviate in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I'm so
Okay,
sorry.
his ears are plugged. Go ahead.
Spoilers, but the moment in the seventh book where Molly kills Bellatrix, because I know Rowling has talked about it as like a moment of like the right kind of love defeating the wrong kind of love, and I've heard a lot of like differing opinions on what that moment meant and who should have had that moment to kill Bellatrix.
I really like that Molly swears. I have this really visceral memory of reading it for the first time and reading the words, and I'm sorry, anybody who is not comfortable with swear words, just, but where Molly says, "Not my daughter, you bitch," and then kills Bella. Oh God, I just got shivers right now. I got shivers the first time I read it, and I just got shivers right now. There's something about it that is just so incredible. Like the whole series has the subtext of a mother's love and the strength and the value of maternal love, which is, again, one of the things that I would say is not actually feminist, but is like friendly towards feminism. And so I do think it's this like really fantastic moment. I'm really glad it goes to Molly Weasley, who for the rest of the series is like relegated to the kitchen. She's like literally in the kitchen cooking for everybody, no matter if it's her family or the Order of the Phoenix. She's just always cooking and cleaning.
Like, that's literally her job for the Order of the Phoenix, is to cook for them. Which is, like, not a form, and, like, the whole time that she's doing it, her form of, like, very important heroism, what you might call her affective labor, is, like, really sort of undervalued by everybody around her, right? And the emotional labor that she does of caring for her family and her children and the children that she sort of adopts gets really sort of underplayed in the book in a lot of ways. And there's these beautiful little moments where it pops up and it sort of, these cracks open and the book lets you see the weight of the emotional labor that she's doing by being this sort of, this love and support for the people around her, like in the moment in the Order of the Phoenix, where she's trying to get rid of the
Boggart.
Boggart and and it's turning into all of her children dying, and like that scene of her just breaking down, right? And I think the moment of her defending her daughter, which is really what it's more about, right? That's this moment where finally her form of sort of maternal love gets pushed beyond this quiet, behind the scenes affective labor to something that becomes heroic in that moment in a way that we can recognize. And I think that there is something really sort of beautiful and powerful about that, and partially because it's not the only portrait of female heroism that we get in the books. Like, if she was the only woman we ever saw do anything cool, that would be unfortunate, that it's like, you can only be a mom. But we get lots of versions of it. So ultimately, I'm glad that she gets a moment of a asterisk kicking.
Yes. Good job.
Thank you.
Nice catch.
That's how swearing out loud works, right?
I'm going to wait for the film episode, actually, to talk
Okay.
about that, the film version of that scene. But
Neil has very important thoughts, and you haven't earned them yet. Sorry.
I haven't seen the movie for like 4 years.
Really hard on Neil.
Hi. I've heard criticisms that a lot of people compare the movies and the books, that they say that Ginny Weasley is definitely downplayed in the movies as opposed to the books. Do you agree with this, and what do you think that represents about movies versus books portrayal of feminism?
This is a good movie question, Neil.
Hey, Neil, you want to talk about
Just for
the
you, buddy.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, fellow male.
You gotta
Yeah,
look
well-
out for each other.
Yeah, who else will?
Give each other the male solidarity hand gesture.
That's just this.
Oh,
That's just finger guns. Wow.
so much physical comedy.
Yeah, no, I think there's been we're really playing around with the physical comedy in this episode. This is going to be a maddening podcast to listen to. Yeah, I think there's been an undercurrent in a lot of the film episodes where we've been talking about characters who have a kind of richness in the books. They have details, and you hear about them for a longer period of time. And in the movies, I think part of it is just because of how movies work that those characters wind up getting sidelined. But I do think there's something political about the choices of which characters kind of get extremely minimized. Thinking of examples. Sorry, I should think about Ginny Weasley, I guess, since that's what you're asking about.
That example he used, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true, actually. I mean, I do think even just that the character, the equivalent screen time to page time feels much lesser. It feels much thinner to me as well. I remember when I finished watching the movies, if you're thinking about that character, it's one of the characters who, I just feel like most of what I know and think about Ginny Weasley comes from the books, right? I think if, this is a weird thought experiment, but if only the movies existed, I don't know that the character would be so rich or so well thought of. I don't know. What do you think?
I have this theory I just formulated in my head just now, which is, so we talk a lot in the podcast about how the book series is written from Harry's perspective, and so there's a lot of information left out that you know is happening, but he doesn't narrate it, because he's an unreliable narrator, right, as we all would be of our own lives. So he only narrates stuff he cares about, and that's why the books, as they proceed, get more sophisticated and give more and more time to the interior lives of people around him as he grows up and becomes somebody who can actually think about what other people are feeling. And so in the books, you get these little glimpses, even before she becomes an important character, you get little glimpses of Ginny and the sort of rich, complex, emotional life that she is living in the shadow of 400 brothers? 400 she has? Yeah. And what that would be like to be a little girl growing up in a house with just that much aggressive masculine energy. And you get just hints that sort of eventually grow into her being this interesting, rich character. And there are moments in the movie adaptations where I feel like the director or the screenwriter has failed to understand that the books are written from Harry's perspective, and that if you want to actually create the world of Hogwarts, you have to add dimension around the edges of what Harry tells you, because there are things that are happening around the periphery of his life that he's not observing, but that are there.
Yeah.
But when the movies fail to do that and still only show you Harry's perspective, but do it in a film style that implies an omniscient narrator, then you end up writing out characters who Harry's just not interested in telling you about.
Yeah, I find it, even just on a visual level, because you'd think you could translate that into a film, I find it very surprising that it's really only Prisoner of Azkaban in the movies that does a very deep field of focus where you see characters moving in the background. If you're watching for the film technique, it's just surprising because it's such a rich setting and a rich world that, for the most part, we're very much focused on the foreground.
Yeah.
Most things.
Yeah.
So
Neil
I just wanted
insists
to throw
Prisoner of
that
Azkaban is like an interesting, sophisticated movie, but I stand by it being like an acid trip.
it made you physically ill.
It
I
made me
think.
physically ill. I watched the first half with Carla in a hotel room, and we kept having to pause it and be like, what is happening? I don't understand this. It upset me. All right. Hi.
Hi. I was wondering.
I thought that was Neil, and I was about to yell at him. Oh my God.
Thanks for
I'm not
joining
gonna
us
yell
at
at
this
you.
panel, Neil.
Yeah.
I was just wondering what you guys think of kind of fandom's perception of Ginny. I don't know, just over the years in fandom, I've noticed that like sometimes it can be pretty negative. How they approach her, and I was just wondering if you guys think like compared to like the books and movies.
Can you tell us more? Because it's only via 100% of what we know about fandom is stuff that people send us on Twitter because we have a strict policy against ever researching anything.
Okay.
And so we're only just starting to get bits, like people give us links on Twitter and then we can read those, but we can't go and find anything ourselves.
Sure.
Yeah.
I like hung out with some people I didn't really know the other day, and they're like, Ginny's the worst character, and how
What?
did she wind up with Harry? Like, just as a random example, and you know, I was.
Did you slap them right in the face?
Violence is never the answer.
Sometimes violence is the answer. Your feminism isn't my feminism.
Okay, everybody.
Hey, that's an ideological split that you've just witnessed right
Okay.
on stage.
Sorry.
Wow.
Yes, so you have encountered sort of a negativity against Ginny as a character.
Yeah, like, I don't know, I've read fan fiction, and I find that they'll treat the character like pretty horrifically to kind of get her out of the picture sometimes. Just like really negative tropes and stuff, but obviously you don't.
Would you say that the representation of Ginny in fandom connects more to Ginny in the movies than in the books? Or does it just seem like...
In that basically they want her out of the way, sure.
Yeah.
Is it because everybody's so obsessed? Is it that thing like, because everybody is so obsessed with shipping Harry with various characters, they dislike the actual person he ends up with? So it's like, I need to get rid of Ginny so I can put Harry with Draco Malfoy or whoever I think Harry should have ended up with.
Minerva McGonagall.
She would take such good emotional care of him. She would always make him eat biscuits, even when he didn't want to.
It's important to stay healthy. I'm sorry that we don't actually have like a solid answer to your question, but what I would like you to know is that that's super interesting, and you have just brought to light something that we didn't know about, which is really great.
I do wonder if that connects to that previous question, or if there's like a flow there. Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
I mean, she's really interesting in the books, but not until a little bit later.
Well, the movies basically reduced her to a love interest, whereas the books she was actually a full-force character.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
podcast audience, somebody just pointed out that the movies reduce her to a love interest, but in the books, she's actually a fully fledged character with a rich emotional life. So maybe it is
Yeah.
that sort of remembering her through the movies, where all she stands for is Harry's love interest, and you seem to sort of write her out. You know what? We'll look into it. We won't. We're gonna forget. Tweet at us, and then we'll look into it. No.
Yes.
Hey, witches. I would like to know what feminist spell you wish you had in your everyday life.
All I want is to set things on fire. I want to be able to burn it to the ground literally every time.
Marcel once joked that the two of us could never be roommates because we would burn our apartment down within like the first week. It's just like too much collective anger. I would really like to have a spell that causes like, if somebody mansplains something, like their tongue falls out.
Wait, you could do like Langlock, which is where their tongue gets stuck to the roof of their mouth and they can't talk anymore.
But I want it to be mansplaining specific.
Well, that's up to you.
Manlock.
Manlock.
Gotcha.
Okay.
That's mine.
Neil.
As a man, I wish that my second thoughts about things were my first thoughts. So I kind of wish that I had a spell that would cause that to happen. So I'll think or I'll see something and then I'll think, hey, hold on a moment. And so I wish I thought, hey, hold on a moment first. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Hello. I just want to say you guys are awesome. It's really cool. I'm going to check out the podcast. Wanted to point out that my favorite example of the day of how the patriarchy brings me down every day is the fact that somebody scheduled the token feminist one at the same time as this one. And I was standing in line like, why? And then I was like, oh, I know the patriarchy. Anyway. Right?
Yes. You are correct.
I have been reading a lot on a lot of news about how trigger warnings are a big thing now, and it's a lot of people feel like they're censoring not only debate online, like I know it started as a feminist thing online, but now in academia, it's really censoring conversation and causing issues there. And I was just wondering if you guys agree with that, or what's your experience with trigger warnings in your work? And I suppose, I guess, if you wanted to relate it to Harry Potter, like, because there are a lot of themes that could like warrant a trigger warning for Harry Potter, like how you think that would change the reading of it or anything.
Yeah,
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. Trigger warnings, as I understand them, emerged, I believe, in universities first as a syllabus design thing, right? That if you were assigning a required text, you would offer a trigger warning in case any of your students had trauma that related to the text that you were going to be reading. And in that sense, it's not about, I mean, the criticism tends to be around this sort of
Freedom of speech.
BS language of PC culture and how it's like oppressing us all, right? If anybody ever says the word politically correct, just replace it in your head with like, not a terrible human. And that's what they mean, right? Like, why should I have to be not a terrible human?
Or like, respect everybody equally.
Yeah.
Why should I have to respect everybody
Respecting
equally?
other people is silencing me. And in that sense, like, trigger warnings are recognizing that in the space of the classroom, you as an instructor have a great deal of control over young people, and those young people have experiences that you don't know about, and that insofar as you can, you want to create a space in the classroom where nobody's going to like have a panic attack because you're forcing them to read something that's genuinely going to trigger them. Because they need to read that text in order to do well in your class, right? And so it's about creating a safe space. It's about the fact that university should be a safe and inclusive space. It's about the fact that, school as an institution should be about including everybody as much as you can. And some people, like, trauma is real, and PTSD is real, and triggers are real. And they get misused, and I would say go ahead and let them be misused if their actual incorporation into our sense of how we teach and how we talk is saving some people from having to revisit their own traumas. Would be my take on trigger warnings.
Yeah, I have never had a class conversation forestalled because of a trigger warning that I provided it on the syllabus or at the beginning of starting to read a book. I've never had people unable to discuss an issue because they knew that something was coming, that if they wanted to, they could skip over those 2 pages or whatever. Yeah, it's never been a problem. I think trigger warnings are extremely valuable and important.
Yeah. All right, I think, can you add it in the mic? But then you're going to be the last person.
Just an important addition to trigger warnings is that they're not necessarily a censorship where they're shutting down a conversation. They are often just a brace for impact. A lot of people want to have the conversation, but you can't always control your emotional impact of something that's happening. And I use impact as a physical term because it can feel impactful. So a trigger warning gives you the opportunity to go, okay, we're about to talk about something that hurts. And then that's all you need. And then you can carry on with the conversation. Or if you don't have the spoons or the emotional left to have that conversation that day, you do have the opportunity to back out. But it's not censoring, it's merely prepping.
Yeah.
So think of them in those
Yeah.
terms.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's
I
a
think
better way to think
that's a
about
great
it.
way to word it. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so we are out of time, and so I'm going to turn the page to this last thing and say thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. If you want to learn more about the podcast, you can check out ohwitchplease.ca or subscribe on iTunes. We have like 14 episodes-ish. I don't know, some episodes. We're also very active on Twitter, so do tweet at us. We love hearing from people. We're at ohwitchplease on Twitter, and we have created a hashtag just for the live show. So if anybody was here and wants to follow up on any of these conversations, just use hashtag WitchPleaseLive to chat with us. And we do hope to hear from you. We love carrying on these conversations in the internet world. But until then, later, witches.